half sun, half star. Oh, Solangelo! You're listening to Ranking Rick Riordan, a podcast about Percy Jackson and the whole wide rest of the Riordanverse. I'm Dan.
I'm Olga, and today we're giving you our spoiler-free review of The Sun and the Star, a Nico Di Angelo adventure.
You can check out Ranking Rick Riordan on podcast services in your ears, or you can watch us and our beautiful faces over on youtube.com/doingok. That's DOINGOK. But first, we have some housekeeping. First off, we wanted to apologize that we didn't get this one out a little bit sooner. First, Olga got sick, then I got sick. As you might notice, Clara's still not here because she's on her honeymoon. So the perfect storm of things at the worst time, because of course we wanted to talk about this big new book. But the plan right now is we're doing this sort of shorter episode that's spoiler free. Then next week, we're going to hopefully put out an episode with Clara that will do the whole recap and everything and include some of your feedback, because that would be swell.
Yes, send us your feedback.
Yeah.
More on that later.
Yes. All right. Do you want me to start or do you want to start?
Let's start.
That wasn't the option.
You start.
Okay. Sun and the Star was a very interesting book. I think I do want to set up by saying, if you are a newer viewer or whatever, I was hesitant coming into this book. As much as I like Nico, they had not won me over on Will prior to this book. I didn't love the idea of them going back to Tartarus because I felt like had been done so well in House of Hades. And I really did end up enjoying this book. And I think that the thing that it did the best was win me over on Will and on their relationship.
Yeah. I had very similar concerns as you. I think I, going into this, enjoyed Will more as a character than you did and was already more into their relationship. Mm-hmm. But Tartarus being... this being a return to Tartarus was definitely like my number one turn off. And while I'm not saying that I was 100% won over by that premise, I still really enjoyed this book overall. I would say that the beginning and the end are the strongest parts. And it did lose me a little bit in the middle. I never disliked it. I would never go so far as to say that. And there was a lot of really good character work throughout the whole book.
Yep.
That's where it really shined. No pun intended, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, I walk away from having read The Sun and the Star feeling good about it.
Yeah.
And hoping we get more Nico Di Angelo adventures.
And more of these co-author one-offs.
Absolutely.
I think the experiment definitely paid off, and it still felt like a Rick book, but with a different edge.
Yeah.
I would definitely say this is one of, if not the most mature Rick book.
Yes.
Of the Riordanverse.
I mean, there's quite a bit in Trials of Apollo that we're on record.
I would say either this, the one where Jason has things happen to him, and
this is spoiler free all around.
And Tower of Nero. Those are probably the three most mature ones out there. But there's even like mature humor in this one where some of it's like pretty dark and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I definitely enjoyed a lot about that. Do we want to go specifically into our pros and cons, or do we just kind of want to chit-chat about it more?
I think we should go specifically into pros and cons. Yep. I think you laid it out in a really nice way. However, before we get fully to this is a pro, but it doesn't quite fit into this layout. Having read it, so you listen to the audiobook.
Yes.
I read one of these copies here. We have, this isn't obviously a copy. There's a book behind this t-shirt. We saw the tour. It was cool. Mark and Rick had wonderful chemistry.
Yep.
The books had this really interesting, like, color texture on them. Oh boy.
This stand is stuck to the book, so never mind.
They have this like print on a bunch of pages that's like wispy and smoky, and it takes place when something non-linear or like not in the present physical realm is taking place. And I thought that was a really cool mechanism for distinguishing that like storytelling.
I like when people play with the medium like that, and I think it was a bit of a shame that they didn't do anything of that equivalent in the audiobook.
Yeah.
Whether it be adding a slight music bed under those parts or some sound effects or something, I think could have been kind of cool.
Yeah. Maybe that is a con then.
Well,
the pro is it's a
pro for the book version, con
and...
for the. But the thing is, like, it's only a con because the book, like, I'm not expecting it, right?
Correct. Yeah. But, you would never expect it. But it felt intentional. So in that sense, I'm like, oh, and Clara, she tends to read these things on Kindle.
Yeah, I wonder if it does.
So
I
wonder if it has
version.
it on that. So we'll ask her, and she'll let us know on the spoiler-filled version of this.
Well, so the first pro that I have is that this book did such a good job of tackling all the things that I had an issue with in The Hidden Oracle, which is the first Trials of Apollo book, which that was one that I think we all struggled with. And a big part of that was the way that they were handling Nico and Will, where I felt like Nico wasn't Nico, where we missed the entire beginning of their relationship. So I didn't know why I was supposed to be invested in them. Where I felt like Will was very one note.
Yes.
Here, Will is 100% a human being. And I mean that in a very positive way.
Yes.
I think when you feel like I could know this person, and I feel like they've done a very good job. And he feels like a full fleshed out 3D character. Nico is able to still have his darkness and also be growing and also have moments of happiness, but also not be like, oh, now all my problems went away.
Yeah.
Which is how I felt like it was presented a little bit in Hidden Oracle.
Yes. Yeah. Hidden Oracle, while not being a book about them, really threw us into their relationship being important for both of these characters, especially Nico, who we do know better and who had been a point of view character in the past. Yeah. And that just didn't feel believable. So it's kind of funny that when Rick hands over half of his writing to another author, it sounds more like Rick than Hidden Oracle did. Yeah. So
I mean, I do want to say that we both liked Tower of Nero version of this a lot better too.
Yes. Yeah. And this takes place after Trials of Apollo. Yeah. So while it continues on that thread, we do see flashbacks to their early relationship, and we get to feel how it builds and feel that like first flutters of romance.
Yeah. And I don't think that that's like always 100% necessary, but I feel like when you follow a character, as long as we followed Nico, and we were so invested in him coming out and him meeting this boy, then missing, like, it's not just like, how did they meet? It's like, we need to see how he developed through, like, how did he ask this person out? What did it mean for him to be out? You know, like, those are, to me, very important questions that I'm really, really grateful this book answered.
Yeah, yeah. And it answered them well. Like, again, the mechanism of learning how their romance came to be is also part of the storytelling device.
That's another thing I didn't even mention, is just that the way that they do things non-linearly, I think, is really cool.
Yes. I didn't write it because I knew I was going to bring it up.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think there's a really good mood to this book, especially with the way that they handle the non-linear storytelling.
Yeah.
It's a very hard one to talk about without any spoilers, but we're doing our best, guys.
Yes. And you won't know when we give something away because Dan will edit it out.
Well, so, I mean, kind of coming off of this, I think that, like we said, I think the strength of this book really is their relationship and the messaging around their relationship, and how it tells a story of a couple that's imperfect and where the people are imperfect and the way they interact with each other are imperfect, but they do love each other and they're trying.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very fascinating that this is a middle grade book that addresses relationships in a very adult way. And I'm not saying like what, the content of the relationship gets like too mature. It's just the way that relationships, both platonic and romantic, any relationship is going to require work and effort with communication. Because at the end of the day, you're different people and you bring your own ways of thinking into interaction. And getting on the same page, staying on the same page, your sympathy, empathy for that person is always part of that process. It's always something that you have to put effort into. And you feel that effort between them as their like relationship grows, even while their love for each other stays very like present and constant throughout. Like you never doubt that they love each other, even when they're having relationship tension.
Yeah. That's the thing is I think it's great that they weren't afraid of letting either character be a little unlikable at moments.
Yeah.
Or like not necessarily unlikable, but like flawed in moments, right? And flawed within the context of their relationships. And the fact that there was considerable conflict between these two, and it wasn't just like, oh, lovebirds on a road trip, which, I mean, I think it could have, in some ways, that's kind of what Percy and Annabeth was. And I think you and I talked about how, like, Percy and Annabeth going through Tartarus was kind of more about how their love helped them each get through their own stuff. And they were dealing more with, like, internal personal things rather than how it was affecting their relationship. Whereas here, I really feel like Tartarus really is about their relationship and the ups and downs and how they're,
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that even though we are revisiting a physical old ground in a few places, the way we're treading this territory is from a different perspective. So it's not just this love will carry us through anything. It's like, I love you, but you're driving me crazy. And
I can't relate to that at all.
We're together for any new listeners. So relationships are work, people. Yeah, no, it's very funny because even this is the least like high school age romance, even though they're high school age, it is not how I remember myself, my friends addressing high school relationships.
I mean, I will say that you can say this as a positive or a negative depending on your viewpoint, but like they do feel like people in their 20s, not like 15-year-olds to me. And I think that in some ways I'd be like so interested to see how a, I don't know, 12-year-old or whatever who's used to reading these books, how they feel about this book. It's also scary at moments.
Yeah.
I mean, like I wasn't scared, but I can see people being scared. It's dark and much more violent.
It is vile. I mean,
The word blood is used a lot in this book.
Yeah.
Much more than in any other Rick book. So I still wouldn't say it's like gory necessarily, but it's definitely not afraid to be like, these are human beings that can get hurt. Like,
the kid who can read, Percy Jackson and the Olympians is not the same kid who can potentially get through this book.
Yeah.
And I mean age-wise, like, if you binge read it with like a 10-year-old, it's not going to maybe go over well with certain 10-year-olds. I think it's possible that depending on interest and maturity level and whatever, a lot of this stuff that vibes for us as older readers would go over the head of some younger readers. But I don't think that means that it's not enjoyable. Everything is like written well, like it's comprehensible.
I think it's written in such a way that you can follow along very easily with what they're trying to say. So what are some of the other prose we wrote?
Well, you mentioned the scary stuff, but overall that happens in a lot of standout like bad guy and foe sequences. We don't want to talk about the bad guys specifically, but I think that what they do with some of the monsters and bad guys in this book
There are definitely some standout moments, some creepy moments, some like legitimate villain motivation, which we don't always necessarily get from these books. And I also think some level of commentary
absolutely
tied to the villains that I think is interesting.
Yeah.
Again, can't really say too much about that. I mean, I know I also wrote there's some great moments for some of the gods in this.
You did.
But I don't want to tell people like what gods are in it and what aren't. But...
Yeah, while I don't want to get into the messaging of it too much to give that away.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like Rick chose Marco Shiro, who is a queer author, to give a genuine voice to Nico and to Will and the issues that they face are beyond their relationship here in the there's meta context in the queerness of their relationship that I think Mark also brings from their lived experience.
Yeah, I agree.
So, I don't think that's a big spoiler because that's something that Rick is on record as having set out to do.
Yeah, there's a number of like moments and things too where I do think it's about like trying to teach the younger generation certain things. There's even like it's like a side one-off thing. Is like there's lines about like consent being important and things like that. Like there's a number of things like that in that zone that they hit on.
That said, while there's teaching moments for younger readers, there are also teaching moments for older readers as well. Yeah. And I think that could even very well be true for parents who might be reading it with their kids, or listening to it on audiobook or whatever experience. I think, again, there's still stuff to gain as an adult reader of this in that context.
All right. Anything else you want to hit on the pros before we go into the cons/critiques?
I want to couch our critiques a little bit as having, again, said, because people can be very opinionated. And we are also opinionated.
Yeah, we're never opinionated.
You just contradicted me. How dare you? We're going to talk about that later. It's a good book. I enjoyed it. Overall, I walk away feeling fond of it. It has stuck with me. We've been done with it for a few days, and I find myself thinking about it in part because I knew we were going to be talking about it, but I'm going to be giving a copy of it to a coworker who didn't realize it was out, and I'm going to be excited to talk about it with her when she reads it. So it's one of those books that I'm like very interested in continuing to discuss.
And I can't wait to hear what Clara thinks and to get in the nitty-gritty of when we rank this against the other books.
Oh, that's going to be really
That's going to be interesting. And we're going to go back, potentially look at should Will be added to the best heroes? Should Nico be moved up? Gonna go back to the shipping ranking and see if we want to move them at all. I don't think we had any like real world locations other than New York, right? So I don't think we need to hit on that. But we definitely have to do best baddie and stuff like that too. Best god, all that stuff. So that will be exciting for next time. But getting into the critiques. So I like this book. I'm just gonna be upfront and say I don't love this book. And I think that that's because as much as I love the character and relationship work, I do not love the plot of this book. It is, I will say, basically what I expected it to be. And I wasn't on board with it going in, and they never really got me on board with the plot. There is a lot of talking about Tartarus, a lot. And I would say it's too much even within just this book, but especially too much if you've also read House of Hades. Yeah.
And at this point, we read House of Hades not that recently.
Yeah.
Still feels too recent.
Yeah.
Still feels fresh enough, unfortunately, to feel like this is like covering old information, covering old story beats.
There's only so many times I can hear about how awful it is there, how this lake is awful, this river's awful, that river's awful.
It sucks your soul out.
The heat here is bad, the
smell
gas
here is bad.
It's there's just page after page of that, and again, that's something that we went through already, and that I think worked so well in House of Hades because it was intercut with non-Tartarus stuff.
Yes, yeah.
And I felt like, because I'll even say that when I went back to read House of Hades, this first time I ever reread it, I was kind of dreading it because I remembered it being so oppressive going through Tartarus. And I ended up actually liking it more on my reread, but I do think those respites of having the parts outside of Tartarus were really helpful, and I was kind of missing them here. There's just a lot of talking about darkness and all that stuff, and it also, it's even like they talk about Tartarus for so long before they even get to Tartarus.
See, that to me is almost the bigger problem, because it takes quite a while before you're actually there, but it feels like you're already there because there's so much lead up. So it really just is like, come on, let's be in it. Yeah. And then you're in it and you're like, hey, it really stinks in Tartarus. And we're like, we know. Again, that's not to say there isn't new stuff within that, but there's a reason the middle kind of dragged for me as well, because we're just like very slowly moving on from a specific location and specific like problems. Yeah.
And I would say that I also think that like the action and set pieces overall are not some of the best. Aside from the climax, which obviously we'll not talk about, I think that everything else that happens in the underworld / Tartarus is not as good as the stuff that happens in House of Hades, as far as set pieces go. I'm not talking about character work.
I don't know if I agree with you about set pieces in the underworld. Based on the first part.
I know what you're saying. Yeah. And I like that first thing.
But I agree with you about Tartarus, that in Tartarus, there's, aside from the end, I don't think there are better set pieces here.
And that's, I mean, I'll also say, I think that, like, I'll admit, I guess, bias. It's weird to call it bias, that I really liked the book before. Like, I mean, like, yeah, it's the same writer. I really, really like Percy and Annabeth's relationship. This book did make me really like Will and Nico, but I didn't come in there with that same feeling. And so the fact that they were so directly comparing, you know, like putting them like so face to face with each other, both the relationships, but also the plot lines and like where they're going and what the quest is. That always rubbed me the wrong way from the very beginning. Yes, because I love House of Hades, and so I'm like, why are you like making me do this?
Well, it's I could see why it might be like intentional. I mean, I'm sure it was intentional. I don't think they did this by accident. But the idea of like, well, one of your like most favorite relationships ever, Percy and Annabeth, they went through this trauma together and you love them. And here's Solangelo, like one of the most visible
queer couples.
Queer lit couples now too, that has such a fan base, and we're gonna show you just as much like how they're gonna get through it with a twist. But it's like,
but I guess wish they had been in a different location doing different things.
It deprives them of their own special moment. Like I feel bad for Nico and Will for not having their own territory is the thing. Like, I don't think it detracts from Percy and Annabeth's time in Tartarus. I think it detracts from Nico and Will.
Yeah, I think it will. I think the problem, and part of what I was worried about going in, is that it kind of detracts from both. Like, if we reread House of Hades now, I do think I'll be like, oh, this part was better in Nico's book, or I do think that the depth with which they went into the relationships were better in this book than they were in House of Hades. And I do think there's issues with the Tartarus stuff in House of Hades.
There is.
But that said, it's like, I just think that there's just so much repetition between the two. And I understand why they did it, both between, like you were saying, the like, this couple's going through their trial the same way, and that they were talking about Tartarus being a metaphor for growing up in relationships and dark stuff and whatever you want to call it. And it makes sense with Nico being Nico that this is where they'd go. Like, it wouldn't make as much sense if they like went to the Sea of Monsters or some other location, right?
That would be
it's
hilarious.
Nico, right? But it just comes back to, like, we know this territory quite literally. And the fact that it's even tied to, like, let's go to Jameson's hut and let's go find Bob, which is from the back of the book. So I'm not considering that a spoiler.
So let's talk about Bob.
Yeah.
It's a problem.
Oh, okay. All right.
I mean, it's the whole like rescuing Bob thing and like the fact that it's so much about Nico's relationship to Bob.
Yep.
A thing that we only learned about really off screen.
Yeah.
Minor spoiler, we don't get their origin.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that I think is sorely missing in a book that does a ton of flashbacks and a ton of dream sequences and stuff. The fact that there's never a flashback or dream sequence that involves Bob and Nico interacting, I think is insane, honestly, because I'm not invested in their relationship. And
yeah.
I understand why Nico is doing what he's doing.
Right.
And I understand that it even goes beyond what Bob almost symbolizes greater things for him. It symbolizes all the loss that he's gone through. He's not going to let somebody else down again.
Yeah.
All that stuff. And
that all tracks.
Yeah. But I am not following in I don't emotionally feel the same way because I don't care about their connection, and I personally, again, this is all subjective.
Yes.
I personally don't care about Bob being saved because I thought that Bob being left behind was one of the best parts of House of Hades. It was tragic, and
yes.
I was good with that. And I was good with the mystery because it was left open-ended.
Yeah. This is I would say more how this book detracts from House of Hades than via the comparison to the couples. It's like Percy walks away from that not just traumatized by Tartarus, but through the sacrifice and the decisions made with Bob.
Yeah.
And like his relationship to Bob feels meaningful. And now we're being told, no, actually, Nico's relationship to Bob is more meaningful. Mm-hmm. And it just feels very disingenuous to me as a reader to be told that.
Well, I mean, I think you could argue that was always the case, right? Because from the get-go, Nico was the one who was nice to Bob after he became Bob.
Yes.
And it wasn't until they were in Tartarus getting their help that Percy, gave two poops about Bob.
Yes.
But, and they straight up were lying to Bob. Although technically Nico was lying to Bob too. Nico never told him who he actually was either. But I think in some ways to me, I go, well, that's a more interesting relationship to follow back up on.
Yes.
Right?
That had an arc.
Yeah.
And therefore that's important to I could see why that would be a thing. So again, I'm not saying that Nico, how dare Nico save Bob or try to do anything for a character other than the ones that we've on the page seen him interact with a lot.
Yeah.
But in a book that has things that don't take place linearly, I would have expected to also have to be able to have read that.
Underline why that relationship matters, because the way they word it in House of Hades, as far as I remember it kind of sounds like they were work buddies, they were
chummy.
He would just come and see him and they'd talk once in a while and he was nice to him. But it wasn't and I never got the impression that Bob meant so much to him or whatever. And so then when I guess very slight spoilers, but when we hear about what they're going to be facing in Tartarus and what Nico went through the first time he was in Tartarus, and I go, so you're going to do that again for Bob? And if it was Will's down there, I wouldn't question it because I know their relationship. Yeah. But for me, I'm you're going into a no-win situation at all with no plan for Bob.
Yeah.
And then this might all just be stuff that for everybody else they just went with it. But
because again, the metaphor of Bob is also valid.
Yeah.
But we're saying Bob a lot, but they say Bob a lot too.
What else do you want to hit on?
Continuity issues.
Yeah, which we can't really go into detail.
We can't say specifics here because.
But there are a number. Let's just say if you go on the trivia part of the wiki.
Are they already
there? They have hit on quite a few different things that straight up contradict things from previous books.
People are fast.
Yeah. And they're all things, to be clear, I didn't just see them in the trivia. I knew them as I was reading them. But
we noticed.
There's also some just funny goofs where like he calls Bianca his mom at one point and stuff like that. But
spoiler alert now. But again, not all of them are that important.
Yeah.
Either.
Yeah. Again, it's like how much do you want to nitpick? There's a lot. I'm a nitpicker.
We have a podcast.
I will say on the flip side of the positive, it's that they do a lot of really good continuity things and call back to things you think they would never call back to from so many books ago. And that stuff is great. And I think that to some degree, that's why the mistakes bother me more.
Yeah.
It's like if you put in that level of work, you know, why isn't it all the way?
Well, to be fair, some of the stuff that seems like a continuity error, you could rationalize, like there's room for interpretation around it. But even then, it kind of sometimes pulled me out of the reading experience enough to go, how can I rationalize this in the canon of the world? Yeah.
And I think something worth noting is that this isn't particular to this book. Rick has never been the most continuity-focused author. And so I don't want to make it seem like this is an issue here where it wasn't an issue other places. It's been an issue. But yeah.
Case in point, Hazel's age.
Nico's age even, I feel like, has gone up and down a few times. But
Nico is an ethereal being.
Yeah.
Look at his lovely face on the cover.
I mean, we have a few other things, but I think, do you want to end with the silly one?
The silliest one. I don't care that this is a spoiler-ish thing. Will does not bring a weapon with him to Tartarus. And again, they're not thrown in there. They plan to go.
And Will very particularly packs for a long time.
There is a relatively extensive packing sequence.
Yep.
And a weapon is not included.
Yeah. Again,
you can rationalize this. I'm a medic. I heal. Son of Apollo, who's not actually good with bow and arrow.
Yeah.
You're still... we know you fight, boy.
Yeah, well, the fact that's the thing. They call out that he has been in wars and that he has killed monsters. So it's not like they could have spun it like he's never killed the monster before. He's just a healer, do no harm or something like that. But they don't. And they even have a core part of his character in this story be feeling insecure and like, is he able to be helpful? And then he ends up in situations over and over again where he's like, I should have a weapon right now. I will say, on the flip side, it does lead to a number of times where he gets to use cool new powers, and I do enjoy cool new powers.
But again, he could have had a weapon and lost it.
Yeah, that would have been nice.
He just straight up doesn't have one. Does he find a nice sharp rock to use? No. Spoiler, there's no nice sharp rock.
He might use a sharp rock once. Maybe. I can't remember. But
anyway, that to me was somehow maybe the worst part of the book. And you know what? Take with that what you will. That's the worst part of the book. Then that's probably a pretty good book.
Yeah. So let's wrap it back up with some positivity at the end and just say, I think this is a really unique book that I'm glad exists.
Yes.
And I do want to see what can happen in the future, whether it be, more of this particular pairing, whether it be another standalone with a different author, whether it be, hey, Mark, you go write the next one without me.
Ooh.
I could see that too.
Yeah. And I could, and again, I feel like Mark learned their voices really well.
Yeah.
You can't really go, this is Mark, this is Rick.
Yeah.
Like, it's pretty seamless.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I think there's some stylization choices that feel like their mark, but it's not like I'm like, oh yeah, this line was written by Rick and this line wasn't.
Yeah.
Like they found a good
balance.
Yeah.
And again, walking away, positive feelings. And if you've read the book,
let us know your
feelings,
positive and negative feelings.
Yes, just let us know your feelings. Let us know your thoughts, because we will be giving a spoiler-tastic review.
Please send us your thoughts at ourpodcastfeedback@gmail.com, comment on the YouTube version of this podcast, or tweet at us at Ranking Riordan. Also, let us know where you'd rank this book, where you'd rank the baddies, where you'd rank the couple, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And please send us reviews on Apple Podcasts, Audible, and Spotify, and all the other good stuff. Thank you guys so much for listening/watching, and we'll see you next time.
May the gods be ever in your favor.
Well, I mean, this is a spin-off, so maybe we don't say that. Maybe we say, may Nico Di Angelo be always in your favor.
May the darkness never find you.
May you battle your demons. All right, goodbye.
Bye.